Brilliant. Thank you, Lauren. And yeah, thanks again to Zoe for stepping in. It's really nice to be here, especially given that this is a 2-year project and last year's IEEC happened right at the beginning of that. So we took away a lot of inspiration and a lot of motivation from the conversations we had there. So I'm Michelle and I'm Principal Investigator of the START Entrepreneurship Project, which is across 3 specialist arts institutions. And you're going to hear from me and my colleagues Jessica and Zoe from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama and University of the Arts London. Okay, so I'm going to start by giving you a brief overview of the project, which is 2 years. We're halfway through, and we received £902,000 for this from Research England and the Office for Students. And we've had a brilliant and fun year so far, and we're looking forward to year 2, but also really open to your input. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. The presentation will then focus on 3 of our key learning points, which you can see here. And each of us will discuss one of those, and we'll take those questions at the bottom of the slide into account. We'll talk about the specificity to creative industries in particular, and the extent to which these key learning points are across our institutions. And of course, COVID will make an appearance. So the START project began last September. It's a collaboration between our 3 institutions, and it seeks to develop new ways of helping creative industries students to develop entrepreneurship related skills. And we're interpreting that quite broadly. So everything from startups to skills in leadership and resilience. Here are the priorities for the project. I won't read these out, but what I will say is that basically the £902,000 that we have, most of that, around 3/4 of that, is for staff. So it's very much a teaching project about developing new initiatives within the 3 institutions and across the 3 institutions, and learning what we can to then be able to share that with the sector about how you can best embed these skills in the training programs for these students. Of course, a lot of what we're doing is underpinned by the QAA guidance, and we're extremely grateful for all the support and mentorship and wisdom we've had from Andy Penaluna. Thank you, Andy. But what we're specifically focusing on is how can you take this and make it relevant for creative industries students in particular. And the challenges for this project have increased over the last year because the industry is even more fragmented and unpredictable than ever, thanks to just how much our industry has suffered during the COVID-19 pandemic. The slide's slightly unclear, but here are some of the headlines from our first year. So we've engaged with students for 4,000 hours in terms of our work with them so far across the 3 institutions. We've worked with a lot of new industry partners, sector partners, alumni, and we've delivered a lot of new events, both within the curriculum, outside of the curriculum. We've created a lot of new materials, such as lesson plans and resource guides and best practice guides. And thank you to everyone who's been part of the project and everyone who's helped us. It's a big project with lots of staff who've worked really hard and lots of expert advisors who've given us their time and their expertise. So I'm now going to hand over to Jessica, who's going to take you through our first key learning point.
Thank you, Michelle. We're going to be talking about managing uncertainty, and obviously that's something that's very much part of an entrepreneurial training. But I think particularly looking at it in the context of the creative sector, and we were applying this where the students were specialists, but they were specialist orchestral members, they were actors, they are designers, they are fashion designers. So they, at the start of this, we were looking at introducing into a curriculum that is at its heart a collaborative endeavour with real people in real rooms, in orchestras, in design studios and theatre spaces. And they're used to making working spaces with other people. And our students learn through practice, through rehearsals, through live projects, through industry placements with professional organisations and with individuals. And the last 18 months has seen all those certainties in structures and careers swept away. And in parallel with that, this enforced period of reflection has led to an interrogation of who the arts were for and who they benefited. So in this kind of really uncertain world, we brought START, and there could have been never a more important moment to be doing that. And we invited students to focus on their agency, on what they can control rather than what they can't, and using effectual logic to start with who they are, what they know, and who they know. And this means not waiting till things get better, but to address the problems, to actually centre the problems and limitations and seize the agency that they do have both in their skills, their kind of specialist skills, but also really importantly in the network that they had around them. And we'll share some examples of what we did shortly. But I think in terms of introducing this, just really bearing in mind that this was introducing it into an existing curriculum, both in an in curricular format and extracurricular activities, we found two things really, really useful, which is the first one I've mentioned, the sort of bird in the hand element of effectual logic, the starting with who you are. And then also the patchwork quilt, the sort of really thinking about how they built engagement with their work as they went. And that's happened, for example, in some shared activities, in students joining pitches and things like that. It also meant building these stakeholders, if you like, could happen well online. So we were looking for the affordances of our kind of digital space, and really thinking about the social capital that they had, and encouraging students to think about that. One of the major outcomes of this process, of this kind of really starting from who they are and what their values were, has been the demand arising from students to understand more about social enterprise. And I would say that this kind of social turn does predate for us the pandemic, but with the creative arts ecology in crisis, students could see that startups could address gaps in support structures, could address audiences that had been neglected or marginalised, and could attend to critical issues in our sector. And students are increasingly, I think, seeing that enterprise could be a form of activism, and that social enterprise business models might work for them, and that suddenly money wasn't kind of an alien concept, or that raising funding or finance wasn't something out of their sphere. And I think Zoe will be talking more about making money and making a living in her section. So the final thing I'd like just to mention is, in the creative sector, we do have a process for rapid prototyping. We just call it rehearsals, or we call it sketching. And in that process, we, the staff, the students, try things out and learn from what works and what doesn't. And there's no fear of failure in that environment. And experimentation is not only encouraged, it's kind of necessary. But when it comes to thinking about enterprise and some of the languages around entrepreneurial practice, students suddenly kind of froze up and perceived any form of risk as failure. So, that even blocked them from getting started. So we've been tackling this by encouraging students to see what skills they already have in their specialist training that helps them develop entrepreneurial skills. So things like problem solving, collaboration, vision, curiosity, and it's a kind of mapping process, if you like, and encouraging them to see that developing a business idea is an iterative, playful process, making a bridge from where they are to where they want to be. So a couple of really quick examples of how we know this is working. At the RNCM, the Get Creative Fund, lots of amazing applications, and one of the winners was Olivia Hamlin, who had a project looking at musicians' health and well-being. At UAL, they have a well-established hackathon process, and that's been developed. There's also been the Fashion Futures Toolkit 2030, and things like Social Design Institute and the Centre for Circular Design. So I'm now going to hand over to Zoe. Michelle, I think it is next, isn't it, actually, to thinking about the student's individual journey.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jessica. So I'm just going to talk about our second key learning point, which is this idea that these creative arts students have an individual artistic identity when they join our institutions, and they bring with them values, beliefs, aims, goals, ways they want to change the world. And what we found is that it's really important to meet them where they are and to allow them to reflect on those and to help them to develop those. And we know this from the literature. So you can see here, this top quote talks about marrying up the bohemian with the entrepreneurial qualities, and that we have to help students and accommodate their potentially disparate identities. The second quote talks about how perhaps entrepreneurship, as seen by creative industry students, is different from how a business might see it, or a business student. And then finally, right at the bottom, what we have to do with students is to work with them on career identity depth and career identity adaptability. But it's really important that we accommodate their individual artistic selves. So here are some ways that we've done this at the RNCM. We were able to take everything we'd learned in the first part of this project and put it back into the newly revalidated music project. So we now have a module that all first year music students will take, where they will reflect on their practice and be encouraged to think about what they want to achieve as individual artists. We're using a lot of reflection, especially for assessment, right from year one, and we're grateful to Philip Clegg for introducing us to the software LoopMe. We had a fantastic speed networking session where actually some of our team members from across the other institutions came and joined us as mentors, where we matched 10 students with projects they were developing with 10 industry experts. And this was fantastic knowledge exchange. You can see from those two quotes on the right that not just the students, but the industry mentors got so much out of this speed networking. We've discovered that mentoring is a key part in how you help people to marry up their individual artistic identity with their entrepreneurial aspirations. And actually, we didn't have any money for mentoring in the budget for the START project originally, and we changed that, and we ran that back past the funders and said, we've realised how important this is. We've run some drop-in sessions where students can come every 2 weeks and just link up with a tutor or with someone from industry that we've invited along to help develop their idea. And we've realised that a couple of elements are really important in how those student ideas, whether they are social enterprises or businesses, in how they progress. The first is that students working together can really help them to develop those teamwork and leadership skills. The second is that alumni are really important. So rather than bringing in somebody who's already got a glittering career in the music industry, it's really effective for students to see someone who's quite early on in their journey, someone they can relate to, someone that's been down the same path as them and can help them with those early steps in developing what they want to develop. And then finally, accommodating the individual artist is also includes this really central theme of how we open up access and inclusion. And we've tried in lots of ways on the START project to make sure that we do this at every step. For example, we've got an event coming up in November for students across 3 institutions. And we have an individual expert in personal learning who's meeting with every student who's coming along who has learning needs. Here are 2 examples from our partner institutions. So at University of the Arts London, they also have these one-to-ones where students meet with mentors, and on their graduate incubation programme, their graduate entrepreneurs are matched with industry mentors. At Central, they've run a number of events around the global majority, so again, to try and increase access and inclusion. And also, Jessica and everyone at Central changed the way that students apply for their award this year, and they submitted videos, which allowed them to just express themselves a bit more than just a form. And I will now hand over to the wonderful Zoe. Thank you again for joining us to talk about UAL and money.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for having me. Yeah, so I suppose it's well documented that there are issues in the creative industries with students, graduates, creatives getting paid. And in one way, COVID's really helped with that because it drew attention to the fact that suddenly when you're locked up inside, you realize how much of what you consume was created or built by someone with some kind of creative experience or a creative degree. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways that we've tried to embed, not focusing on money, but we've tried to embed ways of approaching it and being open about it within the project, and why we really need to be, doing that and thinking about it. So we all know there's value in exposure, in experience, in learning, and that's what often is, used as a tool for exploiting students and getting kind of free labor, let's say. But the problem with that sentiment is, unfortunately, students, graduates can't pay their rent with those things. So we need both. We need those things to exist, but we need to pay them at the same time. So the minute you make an opportunity about just those things, so by saying, oh no, there's no budget, but there'll be really good exposure, you're effectively excluding lots of students from accessing that opportunity. And that can often mean that entrepreneurial activities or entrepreneurial learning and extracurricular activities that fall within that just aren't diverse and aren't open to the whole student body. And that's been really important for us to factor in with the kind of overall goal of the project. So a lot of what we're doing, probably all of us in this space, in this room, in enterprise education, is kind of teaching students to understand their value. So like I said, it's been really important to kind of model that within what we're doing in the START project. So what that means is if we ask students for their input, we pay them. If we co-design something with them, we pay them. Even if that thing that they're designing is designed exclusively for their benefit, they still have a value within that process, so we pay them. If we value their time, their energy, their creativity, their feedback, their commitment, and we do deeply, then again, we pay them for their time and for that commitment. And beyond that, we try to teach and talk really openly about money. So we've heard directly from students, both in this project and elsewhere, that they find it a bit of a taboo. It can be really hard to talk about and to address. So we're trying to break down those barriers a little bit. So perhaps you're a student with, you know, clear financial goals, you want a 6-digit salary, or you aspire to run a business with a huge turnover. Great, so how can we help you with that? Or maybe you're a student that really wants to explore your enterprise learning, but for, you know, various reasons and barriers, you can't access extracurricular activities. Great, so that's why we're choosing to do a lot of this work embedded in the curriculum, and we'll meet those students there. Or maybe you're just a student that wants a sustainable art practice. Perhaps it's not about money, but you need an amount of that to, you know, to survive, to keep making and selling your work. So through all of the teaching we do, we're embedding IP, contracts, licensing fees, royalty agreements, pricing, production, product feasibility, and perhaps most importantly, money mindsets into all of the work within this project. And I think if we're going to deliver enterprise learning for all, which is part of the remit, part of the intention of why we're all in this space and why we're working on this collaboratively, we just can't ignore the individual student journey. So Michelle touched on this a little bit, but of course, success looks really different for everyone. And it isn't always about, you know, this kind of idea of high growth or getting investment or Dragon's Den, you know, all of those kind of classic connotations around running a business or being an entrepreneur. So we really have to meet the students where they are, and we have to acknowledge the role that privilege, access, and agency play in a student's experience, and their access to even considering or contemplating being an entrepreneur or starting something from scratch. So to ignore what a big role money actually has in that concept and not to address it would really be to kind of do a disservice to our students. So across the 3 institutions, we've delivered activities to a large number of students, multiple disciplines, multiple industries. And so you're probably thinking, okay, cool, but what does this look like in the classroom? Do you want to do the next slide? So we've kind of covered everything from the kind of tangible and practical of sessions on budgeting and tax at RNCM to the more kind of mindset focused work at Central, and then right through to running live industry briefs, collaborative briefs at UAL that cover the whole spectrum of needs of a kind of creative and diverse cohort. And all of this is just with a view to empowering them to, you know, built to feel the confidence to be the next creative industries, but also to get paid doing that. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Zoe. I'll just spend a minute rounding off. So what we found generally, these are 3 of our main key learning points. There are others. This carefully considered, planned and informed training in entrepreneurship related skills is really important, and more so now than ever. Here's a graph that shows data we collected from all of our students that are coming to our November event. And we asked them what skills they feel that they don't have as much training in as they might like. And you can see digital skills is right at the top there. So it's really important that this project adapts around COVID and prepares students for the post-COVID industry. So what are our next steps? First of all, we've got this exciting boot camp coming up in the first weekend of November, which is the first time students will come together from across the 3 institutions. We're building on what we've learned this year. and developing those things we're doing in the curriculum and outside of it. We have one more bootcamp coming and a final symposium. And what our second year involves as well is starting to consolidate our knowledge and reflect on how it can be mapped against frameworks like EntreComp. We want a lot more student-led activity in the final year. And then, of course, when the project comes to an end this time next year, we need to make sure that everything we've learned is embedded and there's a legacy for the project. I'm going to leave the final word with Olivia, who was one of our winners of our Entrepreneurship Award. And she said, I'm so grateful for the START project. The whole programme was invaluable to me and has equipped me with the skills needed to pave my way into a music industry that's so rapidly changing. Without the inspiration from this wonderful scheme, I would never have been able to get where I am today with my new charity, Musicians' Minds Together. And for Olivia, these 3 key learning points have been vital. She's needed the money to get this started. She won £2,000. She has a very personal vision and journey. She wants to help musicians with mental health. And she has a very individual artistic identity as a vocalist. So she's a really nice example, I think, of what we've found and what we've learned on the project so far. Thank you very much.